Okay, here's just a couple quotes from the book Holy Grail of Wisdom Quotes by me, Pete Rogers. These quotes are about conversation. I like Bill Murray, the famous comedian actor. He's also part Irish. He said, most conversation is predictable. You know what the other person is going to say before they say it. You know what you are expected to say. All you have to do is throw in a little surprise and it becomes fun. I think he's one of the best comedy actors ever. My favorite movie from Bill Murray would be Groundhog Day, but Caddyshack's an awesome movie, and he had a lot of other movies he's really good in, like Stripes, for example. He's really good in Scrooge. Okay, next is a quote from Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde's another Irish guy, and he said, "Some people bring happiness and laughter into whatever room they enter. Others remove it." And that's how my mother was. My mom was like the funniest lady, and she would say very vulgar things, but in a funny way. Um, and so she was always put everybody in a good mood. You know, she made the joy of the house. Um, okay, next quote by Richard Seal. When you fall into a man's conversation, the first thing you should do is consider whether he has a greater inclination to hear you or that you should hear him. Yeah, you make eye contact and see where the person's coming from. Okay, next, the American poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. He said, "A single conversation with a wise man is better than 10 years of mere study with books." Yeah, and that's true. I've had that experience a lot of times in my life, you know. When I was a wrestler at Stanford, I was scared of the Schultz brothers my first 2 years, but I didn't improve that much. Then once I just asked them, "Could you please help me?" And then I started getting better real fast. I've seen that. You got to seek out people who could teach you stuff if you could find them. When I was a freshman, my advisor at Stanford was Fareed Murad, and he was an older guy and he's kind of fat. And I'm like, who is this guy? I never spoke to him again after meeting him at freshman orientation. Then I later find out that he won the Nobel Prize for the discovery and the elucidation of nitric oxide. That guy was my advisor, and I never once ever spoke to him. I could have learned a lot from him. It was stupid. When I was young, I didn't know what I was trying to accomplish at first. Okay, Ralph Waldo Emerson. Conversation is the laboratory and the workshop of the student. Now, one thing about that is if you go like, England and Cambridge, Oxford, where they have a tutorial program for, let's say, the PhD students, that's what they do. They talk to their advisor, about once a week, and then he gives them assigned reading, and they're just told to, answer a question, and they come back and discuss it with them, and that's a very good way to learn if you're lucky enough to have mentors like that. Okay, Quintilian was the leader of a school on oratory, and he was a big fan, in ancient Rome of Cicero, and he had there's tons of stuff from Quintilian, but here's a quote from Quintilian. "Promptitude of speaking can only be retained by practice. The best practice is daily conversation with persons whose knowledge and wisdom we respect." Yeah, and I noticed something too, like with my kids. I would have like a banter with the kids, and I would tease them and joke with them, and then sometimes they would get a little annoyed with me. But later, a couple years later, they said, "Dad, all your joking and teasing and repartee type stuff with us, that was good for us, because when we talk to our friends, then we can do that too, because we're used to doing it in conversation." Okay, next quote from Michel de Montaigne. "The most fruitful and natural exercise for our minds is, in my opinion, conversation." Okay, here's a quote by Lisa Kirk, the actress. She said, "A gossip talks to you about other people. A bore talks about themselves. A great conversationalist talks to you about yourself." Yeah, there's some women who are just very likable who do that. They kind of talk to you about yourself, and I don't know, they just put you in a good mood. Um, and I like this. A bore talks about themselves, and that's kind of like the quote that the nice thing about narcissistic people is at least they don't talk about others. Okay, they're not going to talk about you. Rene Descartes. "The reading of good books is like a conversation with the finest minds of past centuries." John Dryden, the English poet. "Repartee is the soul of conversation." Yeah, it's good to have friends that are fun to talk to like that. You get better at talking. Roger Schenck was a smart, computer science guy who wrote a book about teaching. It was quite good. He said, "We learn by doing, by mutual story exchange and conversation. When we have a goal, something we are trying to accomplish, when we have peers and mentors with whom we can discuss things." Yeah, that's a perfect example. Like whenever I see a good brain case, okay? I call up one of my brain doctor buddies and we talk about it. And we learn a lot from those conversations. Okay, Peter Elbow was a very good writing teacher. He wrote a book called Vernacular Eloquence, and here's one of his quotes. Our goal in revising by ear is not just to mimic casual conversation, but to create the best musical performance of the words, the performance that best sings the meaning. He also was a big expert on writing about voice. You know, the writer's voice that kind of guides you through a book is one of the most important things about the book to make it entertaining and easy to follow. Okay, the goal is to make your writing more like conversational speaking. And and I would summarize the best advice I ever thought of for writing was just make it like a conversation with an intelligent friend. Because if you write like you're writing to an intelligent friend, that's the kind of person who's going to want to listen to you or read what you have to say anyways. So write towards them. Okay, let's see. Now Henry Fielding, the English novelist. There is a sort of knowledge beyond the power of learning to bestow, and this is to be had in conversation. So necessary is this to understanding the characters of men, that none are more ignorant of them than those learned pedants whose lives have been entirely consumed in colleges and among books. For however exquisitely human nature had been described by writers, the true practical system can be learned only in the world. Sounds good? Almost done with these quotes here. Okay, just one more here from Edward Gibbon. He's the big historian who wrote The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. He said, conversation enriches understanding, but solitude is the school of genius. Yeah, you got to read a lot on your own, but, they're both good. All right, I hope that was interesting.